All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming to our May office hours. This is job interview advice for neurodivergent professionals. And I'm so excited to be joined here once again by our guest expert, Alex, who is a communication coach and speech language pathologist, and specializes in helping with neurodivergent professionals. Well, not professionals, specifically adults, but for me, I work with neurodivergent professionals as a career coach. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself right now for anybody who is not familiar with atypical careers. Sorry, I'm getting all my screens mixed up here. Here we go. That is my face. So as you know, my name is Veronica, and I am the career coach behind Atypical Careers. And I founded this business because honestly, there is not enough career support out there for neurodivergent professionals. And so we wanted to really make sure that there are those resources that actually validate those experiences for everyone here. And apologies right now, I am just playing around with the settings here just to make sure that we've got it. But yeah, now in a moment, I'm just going to ask my friend Alex and my friend and colleague Alex to introduce herself. Alex, why don't you go ahead here?
Hi, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me. It's so fun that there's such a nice turnout today. I'm excited to talk to all of you and hopefully offer some helpful mentorship and advice here. And thank you, Veronica, for having me. I go by Alex, written Alexandra. I am a speech therapist with about 5 years experience. I've worked with a variety of ages, and I've really enjoyed working with neurodivergent adults. I actually got an ADHD diagnosis last week, so I'm really excited to finally officially have that instead of just guessing what's my brain, why are things happening the way that they are. And I really enjoy helping adults who got like late diagnosed or are just trying to navigate adulthood and learn how to communicate and connect with others in a way that feels authentic to them and that, they can maintain and that serves them. So excited to chat with you all.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that introduction. And I know we're going to be having a really great Q&A today. Just a reminder for anybody who is here, we are recording this and this video will be distributed to other registrants. So if you could make sure that your camera is off and your microphone is off, that would be fantastic. Otherwise, we do have some pre-submitted questions that we will be going through today. We also do have a sorry, we have a lot of people joining. So we also do have, space to answer some live questions as well. So if you have any questions during this call, please put them in the chat and I will do my best to monitor and moderate today to see if we can answer as many questions as possible. So without further ado, our topic today is job interview advice. So let's dive into the first question here. Okay, the first question. I get so intimidated by job interviews and I never perform well because of my anxiety. I trip over my words and blank on how to answer. How can I prepare so I can improve my interview skills? Alex, why don't you take this one first? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I guess I haven't shared this yet, and I'm kind of glad I didn't say it because I think a few more people joined, but as part of one of my jobs as speech therapist, I also am a recruitment and team development lead for a company. And so I lead about 10 to 15 interviews per week, primarily for clinicians, speech therapists, occupational therapists. And so I guess going off of that experience, I feel like every time when I'm interviewing somebody lets me know or frequently lets me know that they're feeling anxious or that they are sorry, I just got ADHD, just got a little distracted because the pop-ups are all coming up on my screen for messages. And I'm like, how do I make it not pop up? I'm just going to try to cover them so I'm not looking at it.
No worries.
Anyway, so I guess what I want to say first is that I think anxiety is a normal part of interviewing for everybody. I think if it's heightened anxiety and if it's to the point where you're not able to perform the way that you know that you can, if you didn't have the anxiety, then I would address that anxiety to the best of your ability. And some things that I think are helpful are prep and like role play with people who, you know, have experienced either interviews. Like I coach people on this. I believe Veronica does as well. And there's some other professionals out there who can help kind of walk you through what interviewing looks like and what you could maybe do better than what you are doing. And I think confidence is like the best treatment for anxiety in this kind of situation. And you build your confidence by living it, experiencing it, and like feeling like you can do it. So that prep, I think, is putting yourself into like as much of a similar situation of interviewing as you possibly can. So if you've got some friends, if you've got some colleagues from past jobs, if you've got a coach that you can work with, a therapist, this is a great place to kind of explore, you know, how to prepare well for an interview and feel ready when the time comes.
For sure. I think, you know, just some other things that I will kind of add on to what Alex just said. Preparing for your interview, like, it's really hard when you're kind of put on the spot and you're trying. And oftentimes I find that a lot of my career coaching clients are really focused on how do I say the thing that they want to hear from me. But instead, I think that we really need to kind of shift the focus and try and make and I kind of joke about this. I try to say, you know, what if your professional self and your professional history was your own special interest? Can you imagine if somebody walked up to you right now and told you like, hey, like I want to hear more about blank, like, and that is your special interest? Think about how fast you would be able to come up with information like that. Now, I know that it's probably not going to come naturally to everybody. Like, work life is not always everybody's, area of interest. But, imagine if you put in that amount of energy in getting to know yourself, so that when people do ask you about yourself, it becomes a little bit easier to draw on that information. So that's just kind of my 2 cents. Anything else you wanted to add before we move on to the next one?
I am curious whether Emma's question in the chat is pertaining to this specific question or if it's just a general question, because I just want to make sure that we answer
I think it's a general question, and we can answer that one next if you'd like,
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Great.
Okay.
So why don't we move on to that question? I'll just move on to the slide. I think it's here so that we can look at the chat here. Emma asks, what do I do if I need to have a fidget in an in-person interview? How do I handle this? Do you have any initial thoughts, Alex?
I have so many thoughts here, Emma. First of all, I think bring all your fidgets. If they help you focus, then why not? Ridiculous to not have them. But I think that depending on what kind of jobs you're looking into and depending on like who you feel like you might be sitting in front of or standing in front of or whatever your interview looks like, you might feel very comfortable to just be upfront. Ooh, a chef. Okay, I personally, and I know nothing about being a chef. That's a really cool career. I personally can't see that somebody would have a problem with you having a fidget if I feel like I thought that's another person. Guys, I jump around a lot. So hopefully you all understand that and are okay with it. But I was going to say that I've actually had people play with fidgets during my interviews in person and not, and they've let me know, like, I have ADHD, this helps me focus, or I have autism, it's like a sensory regulation tool. And I think that's really cool, but I am obviously neurodiverse affirming, whereas some other people might not understand that and might be a little bit like, thrown, if they see you sitting there like messing with something. So I think if you choose to bring something, you have a couple options. You can bring something that's a little bit less like noticeable if you want to go that route. Like I have a fidget ring. I don't know if anyone's ever seen those, but it's like pretty simple. And I will usually just go like this and it helps me make eye contact, and it helps me, not that you need to, but it helps me with that, because I know if I don't have that, I'll often look down instead and be messing with, something. So that, or just bringing a fidget, and in that case, disclosing like why you brought it. So saying, hey, I have this in my hand. Hopefully it won't be a bother to you, but it's just something that helps me focus. And then I think that nobody should have a problem with that, but that would be my suggestion.
For sure. I think the only other thing that I would add to that is that, I think the underlying question is, if I bring a fidget toy to an interview, will that disqualify me for the job? I think that that's kind of like one of the underlying implications there. And, in case that's something anybody is wondering, I think it really comes down to what your main goal is in your job hunt. And obviously the main goal is to find a job, but if we kind of break it down even more, are you in a situation where you can hold out a little bit longer to try and find an employer that would actually accept the fact that you would want to bring a fidget toy or a fidget tool to an interview setting? If you want to take that time, then that might be a good way to kind of weed it out. But that being said, we live in the real world, and there are a lot of people out there who are very much like, I need to find a job no matter what. I need to pay the bills like yesterday. If that is the case and you're feeling like, okay, it doesn't really matter to me, this is going to be a short-term job anyway, and your goal is to just land something as soon as possible, then you might consider, okay, can I go without the fidget tool? And if so, would that bring down my chances of getting hired or bring up my chances of getting hired? I don't want to like talk in a vacuum and pretend that like, you know, discrimination doesn't exist, because it absolutely does. So we absolutely need to just kind of do that risk assessment whenever we're in these kinds of situations. So I hope that is helpful.
I love that.
Yeah.
I just want to touch on that too. I think sometimes when I answer these questions, I tend to answer them with like the first thing that comes to my mind that feels relevant. But I also just want to note that like, I respect and understand that all of you are probably in very different positions right now, right? It's like not all of us are in the same position when we're in the job market, when we're looking for something. Like somebody might be, you know, just trying to make ends meet and is barely able to do that. And that's okay. And so your priority in finding a job might look a little bit different than somebody who maybe is financially stable, let's say, and is looking for something that really keeps them engaged and motivated and all of that. So kind of along the lines of what Veronica said, that it just depends.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the next pre-submitted question. And I do see the other questions that are popping up in the chat. I am logging them down, and I'm going to try and get back to them as soon as we can. But our next question here is, how do I recover when I say the wrong thing in an interview? Alex, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah. So I love, as a person who has conducted a lot of interviews, I love when people can like admit that they're not perfect, and when they're comfortable with themselves and, you know, saying something and then being like, actually, you know, and then they think a little bit more about it and maybe they correct themselves, or maybe, you know, if I ask them something and they start and then they realize they're answering incorrectly and they say, that's not what you asked, is it? And then we kind of laugh it off. And so they make it a much lighter moment than if they say something and then they're just like, oh, I've ruined it, like spiral, you know, now I'm doomed, the interview's over. And so I guess that's one piece of advice, is kind of trying to take it a little bit more lightly and be a little less harsh on yourself if you are noticing that, oh, I said something, don't know if that was the best thing to say or wasn't exactly what I wanted to say. And just kind of, if you get a chance to correct it, you can. I also like to ask clarifying questions, which I know Veronica does, like helps people with as well, and is going to suggest a little bit later on probably. But asking a question to see whether or not you're doing a good job and whether, you know, the person is understanding what you're saying, is you can say something like, did I answer that question fully? And if you do it with a smile, which I know doesn't always come naturally to some people as well, and that's okay. But I think if you do it with a smile, it's going to be pretty hard for somebody to judge you and be like, oh, they suck, like they said the wrong thing, that, you know, and just write it down as like a negative. So
For sure. I guess, yeah, I'm thinking to myself all the times that I've definitely slipped up in an interview, ADHD style, just like going off on crazy tangents. And honestly, like, you know, one of the things that people love seeing is people being human and being able to relate to other people. Now, if you make a mistake and you're sitting in that discomfort and the other people is sitting in that discomfort with you, the thing that both of you want is to move away from that discomfort as quickly as possible. So mulling over it and saying sorry over and over and over again, and like, you know, reliving it over and over again, like, oh, I shouldn't have said that, and beating yourself up is going to extend the discomfort. The fastest way to do it is just to say, whoops, sorry, or whoops, that was a slip of the tongue, or something like that, and move on to the next thing. And that is much more likely to kind of get them back on track with you and be like, oh, they made an oopsie. I do that all the time. Let's move on. And I think that's probably the only other thing that I would add to that. So what do you think, Alex? Let's move on to another question here. Let's see. I might have skipped a couple of them. Let me go back here. I know I had a couple. Yes. So I had this one here. It says, what do you recommend people with autism do in jobs with a competitive hiring rate to stand out, particularly if they don't have much related work experience? So this is kind of tangentially related. Alex, I have some thoughts on this if you don't mind me taking this one first. Because obviously I work with a lot of people with, you know, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, like all sorts of neurodivergent conditions. And, you know, it is really competitive out there, even without having like, you know, a neurological difference or disabilities or things like that. It is really hard to find work. So it's really hard to kind of like, you know, stand out in that crowd when everybody is telling you, just stand out, be yourself. Like, you know, it can be really demoralizing to hear that when you're trying to do that. But, you know, the things that make you stand out and unique don't always bring the kind of attention that you want, right? And so I think that like, if I'm reading this subtext right from whoever submitted this, like, you know, I hope that I'm kind of getting to the heart of what you're meaning, because that's what I'm seeing a lot here. Now, specifically when it comes to interviews, because we're focusing on interviews here, I would definitely say that it's very important to start this, actually, my advice is going to go way before you actually reach the interview. I think the most important thing that you can do is figure out what is the line of work that will give you the best chance for to leverage your strengths, that will connect with what motivates you naturally, because we're all going to have down days where we don't want to do our work and we need something to motivate ourselves through it. And we also need to be aware of what our limitations and challenges are and how we can cope with that and advocate for ourselves and things like that. When you kind of figure out what direction you are going, instead of just, you know, spreading out and just trying to figure out who will hire me, who will tolerate me, blah blah blah, right? You know, we want to really make sure that we are focused in going into into a line of work that will actually work with what we have. So the research really starts way earlier. So by the time you get to the interview stage, hopefully the goal is not to try and anticipate what they want to hear from you and try and parrot back what you want them, you think they want to hear from you. Rather, it's more about knowing what makes you strong in this line of work that you have chosen and really focusing on making those parts of you shine. And obviously there will be little things like, if you want to, like, you know, obviously it's up to you how much you want to mask or how little you want to mask. That is the choice thing. But, you know, I would never judge someone for having to mask in an interview. It's rough out there. We need to pay bills and stuff like that. But, you know, I don't want you to feel like that is the only way to find a job. There are ways that there are jobs out there that will celebrate the things that you have to do. And hopefully there are some of us in this group that are actually going to have the privilege of finding those kinds of jobs. So, yeah, I feel like I've been rambling for a bit. I'm gonna ping it over to Alex. What do you think? Do you have any thoughts to add?
I love talking to you guys. I love talking to Veronica. I feel like usually I'd be really nervous for something like this, but Veronica always helps like get my thought juices flowing. And then I'm like, okay, ew, that was kind of gross, thought juices. I don't think I like that. Anyway, sorry about that. I'm getting distracted too, as would be. What I was going to say is you kind of touched on this, and in speech therapy, I don't know if anyone's like a therapist here or if anybody has done like research on different theories, but there's an approach that you take in therapy that I really, really enjoy, and it's called a strength-based approach. And so basically, like when I meet with new clients, I try, like my first goal is to figure out what they're really, really good at. And I'm like, okay, what like makes you smile? What makes you happy? What makes you motivated? What do you feel like you can do and do with pleasure, instead of like, what are the aspects of your job that you're like, oh, I hate this, or I don't want to do this, or I'm not interested in this. And so I guess to kind of try to tie things in from what Veronica was talking about is like trying to take that approach with yourself when you're focused on, you know, finding a job and finding the right fit for you and being able to sustain yourself and continue working there. So it's not like a short thing where you find yourself again having to go through the job searching process, which I know obviously we can probably agree is hard. And so I think focusing on the things that you're really good at, and then understanding that with each job, there likely are going to be things that you're not great at or that you don't enjoy. And I think somebody might have put in the comments or messages a little while back about like, how do I go about explaining my strengths and weaknesses? And I love this question. And I also, from an interviewer point of view, I hope to eventually train people on how to interview people fairly and to give them a good chance and to be able to learn about them, because your weaknesses should be things that you are aware of, first of all. So I think that you just saying out loud that here are, and weakness is a negative term. I don't love that. I would say like, what are the things that you understand you need to work on? And then what are the things that you excel at, or that are your strengths? You know, again, strength-based positive approach for everyone to be happy. But I know that every interviewer is unfortunately not always going to treat you like that. But what I like is when people tell me, and I think one of you guys responded to this, maybe Elise, brief with example steps you're taking towards improving upon your weaknesses. So I wouldn't offer any weaknesses that are going to like disqualify you from the job. And I would go kind of like gentle on your weaknesses. Nobody needs to hear like the worst thing about yourself that you want to shove away and like, you know, hide. And you should actively work on improving those things. But in terms of weaknesses, you should just share it in a way that spins it positive. So you say like, for me, it's documentation. I'm not great at documentation. It bores me. It takes me a really long time. And so I say, I'm constantly looking for strategies to make documentation easier for myself so that I can contribute in an effective way to the work environment, just as an example. Sorry, I also rambled. I don't even know if I answered the question.
We need to stop apologizing and just own it, honestly.
We do.
Like,
you're so right. Guys, we're a bad example. Don't copy us. Don't apologize for being yourself.
My goodness. Anyway, I think that I'm going to do one more pre-submitted question, then I'm going to move on because we have some really great live questions I want to get to as well. And my cat has decided it needs to be right here. So I am trying to maneuver around him because we respect cats here. We revere them to a certain degree. Okay. The next question is, what in your experience are mannerisms, nonverbal and verbal, that may out you as neurodivergent unintentionally? And this is such a good one because there are, I've talked to so many people, and I think the big consensus is that, you know, neurotypical, like, you know, assuming that there is the binary of neurotypical and neurodivergent people, which it's not, it's a spectrum, but typically neurotypical people will be able to identify who is the same as them and who is different as them. Same with neurodivergent people. We can spot someone who thinks like us a mile away. And so, you know, the fear of that being kind of like, you know, outed in an interview without even having to without even disclosing can feel scary and very vulnerable. So, Alex, what's your take on it?
I'm trying to remember what we chatted about when you told me this question initially, because I think Veronica and I discussed some of this beforehand, and Veronica had taken this question differently. And Kelly, it looks like you're in here, and Kelly said it's their question. It's my question. So maybe you can clarify for us if we got it wrong. But I think, Veronica, your take was that like this person might be asking, how do I not let them see my neurodivergence? Like, how do I not?
That's how I interpreted it. I was like, you know, because I know a lot of people feel very vulnerable about like, you know, outing themselves as neurodivergent. And, you know, a lot of people feel like, oh, the only way for me to find a job is to put on my neurotypical costume and like act it out and everything like that. But, you know, I would love your take on it. Like what kind of mannerisms have you personally seen that might, that align themselves with like neurodivergence?
So I actually just interviewed a woman a few days ago, and she was a little, in my like best guess, initially quirky. And like you said, we can spot neurodivergence from like a mile away when we, you know, interact with a lot of different neurodivergent people. We kind of get used to reading that. And so with her, I was definitely like, oh, I feel like you're neurodivergent, and I wonder if you're going to say anything or not. And she was lovely. But one thing she was doing during the interview that was different, it was a virtual interview, is she was standing and she was kind of rocking a little bit when she was talking. So she was definitely not, you know, still and looking at the camera. She was standing up. She was going like this. And then there was like a spot away from, I don't know if there was something calming over there. That would be maybe one of my guesses, but there was like a specific spot where she continued to look throughout the interview and then would like look back and then again would go back to this. And then at some point I said something and I was like, whoops, sorry, I rambled. I have ADHD if you can't tell. And she goes, really? I'm neurodivergent too. And she pulls out her fidget cube that she was holding in her hands. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And I had I have like a little, do I have it here right now? Oh, well, I wish I had it here right now. I bring it with me. I have a little, like box of mini fidgets or whatever, and we're both sitting there like, look at my cube, look at this one. And so it was a really nice moment. And obviously that's like the ideal situation, right, where we can really be ourselves and feel comfortable to open up and like be I like the reactions that are coming in, especially the emojis that are like but so I guess looking away from the camera or from the person that you're talking to like frequently, or making reduced eye contact, rather than like somebody who makes increased eye contact, that would, I think, be a tell if you're asking for, you know, one thing that I've seen that kind of hints to me that somebody might be neurodivergent. Creativity, and like really high creativity, is a really positive neurodivergent trait that I think comes out in interviews. For me, at least, I'm like, oh my gosh, we're vibing so good because we both have so many cool ideas to share to one another. But I do think that when you're kind of rambling off all of your fun random ideas that happen, if that does ever happen to you, then that's another tell. And then saying things monotonously. Some people, specifically with autism, and I work with some clients on this because they don't like that about themselves. And if you don't like it about yourself, you know, I'm here. Veronica can probably help with that. And there's other people who can support with that. If it's something you like about yourself or don't mind, then that's also okay. Because every job has different requirements, right? If you're going into a field where you're going to have to interact with a bunch of different people all the time, you kind of want to try to be as likable or like approachable as possible, I'm guessing, so that most people like engaging with you. And if you're in a field where you don't have to do a whole lot of that, then it shouldn't matter nearly as much. I'm doing the thing again where I'm rambling, so I'm trying to come back to where I started.
No worries. Why don't I have a few thoughts, if you don't mind me chiming in here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so some thoughts that I have for sure are like, you know, I think the biggest thing that tips people off about whether we're neurodivergent and whether we think differently from them is whether their implied messaging reaches us or not, right? So sometimes like they're implying something, but we're not really getting the implied message. We're just getting the literal message that they're saying, right? So that's one thing. And, you know, it can really feel like a game of like, you know, it can feel like a guessing game. It can feel like just trying to anticipate what they need and all of that kind of stuff there. You know, I think getting to the heart of the question, which is I'm seeing with some context here that, you know, the person who submitted this question doesn't want to be outed before getting hired and doesn't want to disclose that. And I agree, at this time, especially depending on where you live, it can be dangerous to kind of identify yourself right off the bat, you know, depending on like, you know, what laws are in your area and everything like that. So I totally understand that. And I think the main thing is rather than figuring out how to mask yourself as neurodivergent, again, looking back and being like, what are the qualities that they are actually looking for, and try and highlight those as much as possible. Yes, if there are certain qualities that you have that you feel are detrimental to your ability to get a job, then maybe for that interview, maybe you choose to mask. No judgment. I mean, like we need to do what we need to do to find work. But that being said, we do need to find more sustainable ways down the road for you to try and figure out how to balance masking and authenticity at work, or else we are going to hit burnout. And that is a very common problem that we run into as neurodivergent professionals. I'm going to continue on here because we're at the halfway mark, and I know we have some live questions that I want to get to. I am navigating around this cat. I don't know why my cat decided now is the time, but now is the time apparently. Why is this not working? 1 second, folks. Yes, we do. I would pick up this cat and show you how pretty he is, but he will also swipe me because he enjoys his autonomy and he prefers it that way. So I'm going to copy the next question into the chat in just a moment. And the question is, Drum roll, please. What are ways of getting to know yourself? What category should we explore? And can we use others as examples? And how to step outside ourselves? So I have some thoughts, if you don't mind me kicking this one off, Alex. So I think this is kind of like branching off of what we were saying earlier about how it's important to kind of figure out what your strengths are, what your challenges are, what your motivators are, and all those kinds of things. And basically, how can you set a direction for your career before even getting to the interview part, so that when the interview part is a little bit easier to manage, hopefully, because you've done all that strategizing early on. And ironically, this is actually something that I am totally covering in my next project, which I will tell you a little bit more about at the end of this session, called the Buzz Academy, where I am creating an online course for people who want to create their own career strategy that actually respects and validates their neurodivergent needs and the things that come with being neurodivergent. And obviously, we all have different needs. We are so diverse under the neurodivergent umbrella. So this is really a guide to really make sure that you can do that. But so a lot of what I'm saying is actually pulled from that curriculum. And so what so the three things that I had mentioned earlier that are really important to establish before starting on your career transition is one, see if I can remember all this because I've been working on it. One is knowing what your strengths are. So what are your skills? What are you good at? But more importantly, what are you inclined to do as well? Just because you're good at a task, just because you're good at customer service does not mean you need to be a customer service representative if it is going to burn you out in the long run, you know? So just because you're good at talking to people doesn't mean you should be doing it all the time every day. Maybe in small bursts. Maybe you want to do like scheduled client meetings instead of like, you know, all day on the sales floor, for example. So, you know, really getting to know what your strengths are and what conditions need to be met in order for you to access that strength and that potential. So going through your skill sets and figuring out what fits where. You know, motivation is very important because, you know, what I always say to people, I'll say things like, okay, imagine doing the dishes. And usually the person I'm talking to is like, ugh, dishes. And then we go into, okay, now imagine you had to do the dishes and your livelihood was dependent on whether or not you could do the dishes. And they're like, oh God, I'm going to have no money. And I'm like, exactly. So it's very, very important to consider what kinds of things will you actually be motivated to do, even on a tough day where you're feeling down and feeling like, you know, exhausted. You are much more likely to be able to follow through with that task rather than if you are naturally, you know, disinterested in that kind of work. And the third thing is knowing what your limitations and your challenges are, and what kind of criteria do you need met in order for you to be able to do your best work. So, for example, if auditory processing is very difficult for you, then maybe asking for a set of meeting notes at the end of a meeting, or having, you know, a speech to text translator or something like that would be able to help you meet your full potential, because that is a limitation that you have. So those were just some of the initial things that came to mind that you can absolutely explore. Is there anything you would like to add to that, Alex?
Yeah, I think that was awesome. And I think you got to like the bulk of what I would have said or suggested, and you said it very well. One other thing that kind of comes to mind that I would suggest, and I'm not sure if I'm reading this question correctly, but the part that says, can we use others as examples and how to step outside of ourselves? I would recommend, to answer those, to get on LinkedIn if you can, and if you're not already on there, and friend, or like add, I shouldn't say friend, professionally add a bunch of people that are doing things that are of interest to you. So like if their title, and like, I think what helps too is taking a look at their experience, because if their experience somehow aligns with some of the stuff you have experience in, then it might make sense for a role. If there's nothing that kind of aligns, you know, either with their past education or with a job that they've had before or anything else on there, then it might just be a fun conversation to have for you to learn more about that field or what that job might look like. But yeah, so I'm so all over. I'm doing the hand thing that somebody pointed out. I'm like, yeah, I do it all the time. What I was going to say is just that I think LinkedIn is a really, really helpful resource. And in my most recent job search, like about a half year ago, I was chatting up a bunch of people. I was trying to figure out like my next direction before I opened my coaching business. And I was talking to people in sales, people in marketing, people in coaching, and just asking them like, hey, what's your experience? Like, what does your day-to-day look like? What are some of the things that you love about your job? What are some of the things that you really don't like about your job? And that kind of helped me better understand whether I could do that job and could see myself enjoying it, or whether it's not for me. And I learned a lot. So that's my suggestion, if you can, is to use LinkedIn as a resource and talk to others that are doing some of the things that you're interested in to kind of see if that's a good match for you.
Fantastic. Let's move on, because I want to try and answer as many of these questions as I can here. The next question is in the chat now. It says, between my social anxiety, sensory overload, fight or flight emotional stakes, and audio cognitive processing, I often spin out and dissociate in one-on-one interviews. I use Otter AI for closed captioning, but how else can I combat this issue and reclaim 30 of my IQ points? And they've also indicated that they are in senior tech professional. Wow, that is relatable as all things are, you know, and I'm sure a lot of people are kind of feeling that as well. Obviously, you know, it sounds like you have kind of a perfect storm for which makes this particular task quite difficult. I would be interested, and obviously you can share or not, but I will just kind of throw it out there. Like, you know, I would be interested in what kind of one-on-one interviews they are. Are you interviewing someone else for a role? Are you talking to a client? Things like that. Those things might kind of you know, determine what kind of tools you can use in these kinds of situation here. But I think, you know, a lot of it is going to come down to, oh, seeking a job, you are an interviewee. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense there. And actually that makes a lot of sense, because that's the whole point of why we're meeting here. And I just kind of drifted off to all different types of interviews in my brain. So that's very helpful there. Okay, so I think mainly what I will, I'm assuming that you are mainly interviewing online because you are using Otter AI. So you are looking for help specifically with video interviews. Now, a few things that I would recommend for video interviews. You know, the good news is you have something in front, a screen in front of you where you can have multiple monitors open. I'm assuming. You know, hopefully they're not, you know, tracking your screen. That would be very Big Brother and very creepy. So, you know, hopefully you can have some notes on the screen that might be able to keep you on track. So for example, what I might suggest, you know, sometimes people go into interviews and ask for an accommodation ahead of time. Not always comfortable. People aren't always comfortable with it, but some people have had success asking for the questions in advance. Now, one of the things that you could do if you didn't want to do that is, if they ask you the question, tell them, sorry, let me take a moment and write it down. Type it out or write it down in a notebook right in front of you, and have the question right in front of you, so that when you start spinning out, when you start going on tangents, you can look at the question and recenter yourself and pull yourself back. So anyway, that was a tangent. Let's come back to the main topic. And again, again, as we were talking about making mistakes in interviews, don't dwell too much on any errors or perceived errors that you might make. Just laugh it off. Just be like, anyway, like, back to the main topic and all that kind of stuff. That might be helpful. There is a comment in the chat right now that says that maybe you're able to turn your face on video interviews off, and that might help reduce fatigue. That is another option, depending on who you are talking to. Again, it's really going to come down to a risk assessment of who you are talking to and what you think that you might be able to get away with in certain ways, right? But I do find that, you know, if you are prone to a wandering mind, and you're worried about getting off topic, you know, always having something to anchor yourself back is really important. And usually I don't imagine that an interviewer would take too much offense of you taking 30 seconds to write down exactly what they just said, so that you can have the question right in front of you to kind of ground yourself. Anything you'd like to add to that, Alex?
Yeah. I don't know how accessible either of these services or supports would be to you. So if not, then I think Veronica gave some really great suggestions and guidance. But two things that come to my mind is mock interviewing with somebody like a communication coach or somebody else. A shameless plug. No, but seriously, like working with somebody who can kind of play that role of they're interviewing you and trying to see like where you freeze up if it's happening at a certain point, like what kinds of questions, and then seeing if you could, plan ahead and kind of practice until you get to a point where you're able to do maybe not the perfect job at it, but hopefully see some tangible improvements. And then the other thing is occupational therapy. It has taught me so much about working with neurodivergent people, understanding myself, like accommodating myself, and just making my function so much better. If you guys have not heard of occupational therapy, oftentimes occupational therapists work with peds that are like recently diagnosed with autism or that have trouble writing, like handwriting and things like that, or they work with geriatrics like post-stroke or post-cognitive injury or something like that on, relearning some skills. But they also, and one of my very good friends also works with autistic and ADHD adults primarily on helping them with just day-to-day function. And so some of that is like work skills, like jobs. Some of that is executive function. So like time management, note taking appropriately, like processing speed and time, memory, like just a bunch of different things like that. And then the reason I said it was because anxiety can definitely be connected to neurodivergence. It might not be, everyone's triggers and kind of reasoning behind their anxiety can be different. Sensory overload. So occupational therapists definitely work on sensory regulation, emotional regulation, and behavioral regulation. And you also mentioned emotional, is it stakes. Oh my gosh, am I not reading now? Anyway, so that kind of is another thing. I don't know if you have accessibility to an OT, and if you could see if you find one in your area. If you have insurance, you could try to use insurance. If you don't, it might be out of pocket. And yeah, I understand that it's not financially accessible to everybody, but that's something that I would definitely recommend if you want to continue working on some of the things that you had mentioned were difficult.
Definitely. All right. Next question here, I'm popping into the chat, and it says, how do I recover from my brain going blank and shutting down during a long interview? Yes, that is, interviews are really exhausting because you are basically put under the spotlight, and like it feels like you're being grilled, like it feels like they're trying to interrogate you for something sometimes. That is absolutely not the case. It feels like you need to perform the whole time. That is exhausting, putting on that mask, especially when there's so much on the line. So I want to just kind of first off, start off by saying that your brain going blank and shutting down during a long interview is your brain's way of trying to protect you. Now, the only problem is that it's getting in the way of you getting a job. So, I don't know, Alex, like, do you work with people who, have experienced this kind of thing? Like, what's your experience been like?
I am people who have experienced this kind of thing. It just happened when you were sorry to say, but it happens to me very frequently. And now with my diagnosis, I at least am like, okay, makes sense, because the neuropsych was telling me like, your score for this, and this was low, but your score for this, and this was very high. And she's like, so that's why when you say that you blank out, and just have no idea what's going on for spurts of time, and then you zone back in, it's because like your brain is literally at like a lower functioning level for that than for other skills. And luckily she was like, usually we do a good job compensating in our day-to-day life. Like that's how we function, right? There's things we're good at, things we're bad at, things that are hard, things that are easy, and hopefully it all kind of balances out. But if one of your like primary challenges is the brain going blank, I think first of all, becoming aware of that is huge. Like for me, for sure, when I started realizing, oh my gosh, I think I missed half of what that person just said to me, like what just happened, it started like cueing me back into the conversation a lot faster. And then I also think that asking for like repetitions, repeated prompts or questions is absolutely appropriate. So if you do catch yourself like trying to listen, I usually try to just smile and nod. And sometimes I'm there and I'm hearing it, and other times I'm not. And I'm like, I don't really know what's going on. And then if they ask something and I kind of tune back in, which for me, that usually cues me to tune back in, I don't know if that cues you guys, and Veronica, I don't know how you feel about that. Like if you're just listening and you're like this, and then I ask you like, Veronica, how do you feel about that? I feel like if Veronica wasn't listening, she could say, can you please repeat that one more time? Or like,
Yeah.
do you mind sharing that one more time? I'm so sorry I missed that last part. And then that can usually kind of help catch you up a little bit, even if it's not a perfect solution. Can I ask for a 2-minute break, especially in a 1-hour interview? I think that's very appropriate. I think to each their own, but if you go ahead and in advance say that, like, you know, I feel most sharp in like 30-minute increments, and like if I could just have a little reset and then get back into it, I would really appreciate that. Is that possible? As long as you're being polite and professional in the way that you're asking, I don't see that as a problem. I don't know how you feel about that, Veronica.
Absolutely. I was going to actually suggest the same thing, even like, you know, being like, you know, I would prefer a 30-minute interview if possible. If not, like, would it be possible to get like, you know, a short break for like, you know, to use the restroom, like somebody has recommended in the chat and everything like that. And, you know, they don't need to know why you need to use the restroom. It could be a medical thing. It could just be because you want to take a break. Like, they don't need to know. They don't need to. So that's really helpful information there. Going back to what the original question is, because I remember I also wanted to chime in because sometimes my brain goes blank too. And it's kind of like, usually I'll be tuned in for like the first half of like the statement, and then like the second half I'll kind of trail off. So what I sometimes do to kind of like salvage it a little bit is I'll be like, oh yeah, like, so just to make sure I understood correctly. And then you start saying all the things you remember. You said this, and this, and then, you know, wait, what was that last thing again? You know, and then that kind of gives credibility to the fact that you were listening, but you just forgot that last part. And then they take that cue to kind of fill it in. So that's one way that I would like kind of recover in a moment. Now, I understand if your brain is constantly doing that, like for every single question, it might not necessarily be the most helpful advice. So the other thing that I will mention is if your brain has the habit of doing that, set yourself up for to improve your chances of success. I gave the suggestion of bringing a notebook or a tablet or something like that, and writing down the questions you know, as the interviewer says it. That action is actually going to help keep the information staying in your brain a little bit longer. It kind of helps reaffirm what you heard, and you can actually reference it back visually afterwards. And I can't think of an interviewer who would literally get mad at you taking notes in the interview. It shows that you're actually being very attentive, and they don't need to know that it's because your auditory processing is off or your brain goes blank or anything like that. So really just think about ways that you can support yourself in that moment, rather than trying to will your brain into not doing the thing that it does, because you're probably going to be like, you know, that's probably going to be an uphill battle. But it's much better to kind of embrace, you know, your situation and figure out ways to work with it, not against it.
I love that. I totally agree with that.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, let's see if we have anything else here. We have 10 more minutes, and I wanted to get to a couple more of the pre-submitted questions here before we close out. So let me see if I can get to the right one here. I think we already did this one. Oh, wait, no, we did it. Okay. So this question is about disclosure. So should I disclose my autism diagnosis before my interview? Part of me just wants to get it out of the way so they understand why I am the way I am, but I'm also afraid of getting discriminated against. And I think there have been some people in the chat who have expressed similar things, you know, being, you know, and, you know, discrimination is real. That is just a reality that we all live with. So we do have to take precautions and do risk assessments. So I think I mentioned this before. I always say, you know, you need to be able to do your own risk assessment and be like, okay, based off of what you know about this employer, based off of what you know about this individual, what you know, what kind of benefits and risks are there involved in disclosing? So on an organizational level, you could think of things like, you know, do they outwardly on their website say that they are inclusive and they support neurodivergent people and stuff like that. Now, a lot of companies just put that on their website, but you can kind of tell the ones that actually follow through on them because they usually want to put it on their website and socials and stuff like that. On an individual level, who are you talking to on an individual level? Is it the manager? Is it HR? Do you feel like, based off of how much you've talked to them already, like, do you feel that vibe with them? Do you feel safe with them? Or do you feel like they're a bit standoffish and maybe it's going to be detrimental to you to actually disclose? So there is no straight one answer, but those are some guidelines that you can use to kind of assess the risk of your situation. But there is no guarantee. Everything is going to be a gamble, but there are things you can do to try and turn the odds in your favor a little bit there. Do you have any thoughts, Alex, to add?
Yeah, I mean, going to your risk assessment, I think for me and my suggestion here, and the primary driving factor between making this decision, is how badly do you need the job, like this specific job? Like, that's the question I would be asking myself. It might not be fitting for everybody, but I'd be like, okay, if I need to pay the bills and I will literally take like anything and everything right now, then my priority is to just somehow land the job rather than sharing or not sharing. So in that case, I'm still doing what Veronica recommended and, like, doing some research on the company, trying to see, like, are my chances going to feel better if I let them know professionally, like, hey, I just wanted to let you know prior to the interview that I'm autistic, which means that this, and this may come up, or just to be mindful of this. Thanks so much for, acknowledging it, or for your patience in advance, or however you want to thank them. I would just recommend sending a professional note or saying it at the beginning of the interview if you would like as well. But if you're feeling like, if I say that, I have quite like, no offense to anyone here, and it's not every elderly white man, but I have had the experience where many of those people do not necessarily understand, like, what neurodivergence is and how everyone is different, and that's okay. And we should all be able to celebrate our strengths and then get support with things that are challenging for us and kind of work together to help each other. At least that's my take. But if you're not getting that vibe from the person that you're talking to when you do start, you can decide on the spot that it is a good idea or it's not a good idea. So, like, if Veronica pops up and does her spiel to me and she's interviewing me, I'd probably be like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing, like, what you're passionate about. I want to let you know that I have ADHD. I kind of tend to fidget. Sometimes I go off track from what I meant to say. Like, feel free to let me know if I'm kind of rambling, whatever. But if it was like a random white man who was a little older in like a suit or something, and that's who is interviewing me, I would probably make my own decision not to go ahead and disclose that. And I would try to mask or hide it, because I just don't want the risk of, again, risk assessment. Love it. Do the risk assessment.
Absolutely. I've started saying risk assessment because saying it depends kind of is annoying, because that's the answer for everything. It depends. But, a risk assessment is something actionable that you can do. And that's definitely a really important skill to have as a person with disabilities, who's neurodivergent, all of that kind of stuff. I think we'll have time for one more question. So why don't we dive into it here? Let's see. Okay, this is a good one. I've been told that my facial expressions and body language make me seem unapproachable in workplaces. I think this also applies to interview. How can I train myself to appear more likable? And that's the last sentence really gets me. It's like, we're all being told that we're not appearing likable when we're not even mad. Like, we're not even angry. We're just walking around having a good day, and people are like, why are you so angry? And it's so frustrating to always be misunderstood and misread. But it seems that the person who submitted this is worried about that, that impression that they tend to give off in their natural state will impact their prospects when it comes to interviewing. So, Alex, do you have any initial thoughts on this?
I have a lot of thoughts on this because I feel like people have to decide, again, for themselves. Like, somebody else can't decide what is important to you and what's not. And so like I'm at a point in my life where I'm really grateful to be here. And I was not here in recent years, where I'm not trying to please anybody. I'm not trying to like show up in any kind of way other than authentically me. And I'm blessed to be here. And I hope that all of you, if not right now or not in the past, get a chance to also be in a position where you can make choices and like do things that are solely driven by your desire to be accepted as who you actually are. I think we all deserve that. We all want that. But I think that unfortunately circumstances are not the same for everybody. And so if you're noticing that you have this pattern, I actually work with a lot of clients on this and like previous clients. Like I had a doctor, 55-year-old, I think, who got diagnosed with autism at like 50 years old. And he was working a job in a like urgent care where he was meeting like a lot of people, you know, quickly, and then they were leaving. And every time the patients would get patient score sheets to fill out, and he was getting really poor scores, and people were like consistently letting him know that he appears cold and he has poor bedside manner, and he seems uninterested, and he's very abrupt and rigid and whatever, you know, all of these words. And he was like, I don't understand. Like, I love my job, and like, I love to see my patients, and like, I care about them. And I'm like, I hear you. And I'm so sorry that like, this is how you're feeling, because that must be really not a good feeling, you know, to show up and be like, I'm in a great mood here to do my job and service my patients the best that I can. And then everyone's consistently letting you know, like, you kind of suck at this. People don't like you. But he was put on a performance improvement plan, hence why he connected with me as a communication coach and was like, hey, I need help. I don't want to get fired. I want to figure out what's wrong. My priority is to keep this job. And I was like, okay, great. That's it. Like, that's right. Like, he let me know he wants to keep this job. He doesn't care about like continuing to be the way that he is or comfortably. I was like, well, here's a list of things that you can start working on. Which ones of these feel comfortable to you? What do you want to explore? And he was like, all of them. Like, he was like an open book to modify the way that he was presenting himself and talking and acting in order to be more appealing towards his clients. And he ended up getting his scores up. And he said at first it felt really uncomfortable to like, you know, smile every time and be like, how are you? And then say like, oh, that must be hard, and constantly be like validating people, because it didn't come naturally to him. But then he said after some time, the payback of being told he was good at his job and patient scores going up was worth the, I guess, masking, because I do think it was masking. It definitely was not natural. But that learning that skill and implementing that to him was worth it. So I guess I just wanted to tell a story, because I feel like it's different for everybody. Some people might be like, yeah, I'm not changing myself right now. I'm not covering myself up in order to appease people that like, no thanks. And other people are like, you know what? I need this, or I want this. So what do I need to do to get it, or to make sure that this is all good?
Absolutely. Ultimately, nobody can determine for you what is the right way to communicate except for yourself, right? Like, you know, what works for you. And, you know, yes, like, you know, people can think masking is a bad thing, but actually masking is a neutral thing, in my opinion. It's a tool that you can choose to use in excess. You can choose to use minimally. You can choose to use like however you want to, depending on the case it is. But, you know, it's more important to have the information so that you can choose when to implement it and when to use that energy towards it, and when to save that energy, and when and make sure that you have time to recover so that you can be your authentic self. Because you know, ultimately, you know, we're all going to work so that we can live, you know, like, you know, I know it doesn't always seem that way depending on what your situation is like, but the goal is to work so that we have the resources we need to do the things we actually like to do. And if we're drained at work and from, you know, trying to appear more likable all the time, then maybe that's not the right trade-off for you, right? Or maybe it is. Like, there are, like Alex's story, like, you know, it is the right choice for some people. So, you know, it really making sure that you understand, like, you know, the power of masking, and like, you know, the choice that comes with it is very important. Yeah, so I think we're coming close to the end of our time here, and I just wanted to make sure that we wrap up with a few notes. ultimately, like, this is, man, I think we've done at least like 12 or 13 of these office hours, which is absolutely fantastic. And let me see if, oh yeah, I was on the right slide there. So I just wanted to let you guys know about Neurodiverse City Connection, which is Alex's coaching business. Alex, maybe you can say a couple of words about this.
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you. It's ever evolving. I started it about 3 months ago. I ran a social connections group for adult professional women, and it was awesome. I think there was 7 of us participating in that, and I was leading it. And I'm hoping to continue to run a variety of groups to help bring people together and to just address what the need is, because I kind of got sick of, in the speech therapy field, I can only work on certain goals that insurance reimburses unless people are paying out of pocket. And even when they are paying out of pocket, still it's the practice that I work under tells me, you should do this, you have to do this, and a lot of rules. And I'm like, no, I want to do it myself the way that I want to. And so I started this thing, and I'm constantly coming up with new ideas. I'm going to start offering sessions for mock interviewing and role playing, because I think that could help a lot of people, and they'll be one-offs. I'm going to continue running the groups. I'm also playing around, would love people's opinion. If you want to shoot me an email, please do. If you have some opinions on this and how to make it better, I'm always open to hearing it. I would love to do dating and matchmaking for people who, maybe struggle and are looking for a neurodivergent partner, because I feel there isn't necessarily an app for that. And I've heard of a lot of people. Can I have an email? Yes, guys, you can. I'll put it in the chat. I mean, you can also find it on my website. And the more people that visit my website, I think the more it drives it up on Google or something. So everyone, please, if you want to help me, I would love that. But anyway, yeah, it's been so nice talking with you all, and thanks for all showing up and asking such good questions and then being encouraging, because for me, this is still a little awkward and hard to talk to people. And you guys have been really, and Veronica's always amazing at making me just open up and feel comfortable. So
thanks. I mean, the feeling is mutual for sure. And while you're adding your email to the chat, if you'd like to do that, I'll continue by telling you a little bit about myself. Again, I am a career coach for neurodivergent professionals. My focus is helping people with career transitions, and specifically building a sustainable work life and trying to minimize burnout in in our work lives, which is a huge thing for neurodivergent professionals. And one of the other things that I had mentioned earlier today was my newest project, a Buzz Academy, which I'm hoping to launch in the fall. Fingers crossed for me, guys. The timelines are a heck of a thing. But basically, my vision is to have a core online course for specifically for neurodivergent people who want to develop their own career transition and their career strategy for job hunting. So that is that is something that I am super, super excited about, and I hope you guys will stay tuned for. I do also have a Facebook group. If you don't know it, we are at about 79,000 members. Honestly, we are having trouble breaking 79,000 to 80,000. But either way, it's a great community where you can ask questions and get feedback from your fellow neurodivergent professionals from around the world. So definitely check that out if you are on Facebook. And that's pretty much everything. So I wanted to thank Alex again for her time and her expertise on this topic. And for all of you guys, you've been an incredible audience today, and I am so excited to for what is to come. So please stay in contact with all of us. Our contact information is on the screen, and that's pretty much it. So we'll be wrapping up this presentation now. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.